you need it. I'm Terry Spurlock. I'm an extension plant pathologist at the University of Arkansas. I do a lot of work with larger data sets, we'll say, in fields, spatial analysis, imagery, integrating imagery, and harvest data, machine data. So I was asked to come and present on a little bit of the aerial imagery work that my lab does. I don't know how many growers I have in the room, but this is certainly geared towards growers and scouts and consultants rather than a technical research talk. So I hope, I see some faces that I recognize from other places, but hopefully you get something out of that. So what do we hope to accomplish with aerial imagery, right? What do we want to do? Drones are cool, images are cool, without a purpose. We're just playing, we're flying, we're looking at pretty pictures, we're looking at pretty maps. There's got to be a purpose there. We want to find a problem, determine the extent of that problem, the impact, how many acres are affected, right? And then also relationships with other data. Think about it. How do we relate that imagery to harvest data? How do we relate it to a soil, a Sergo, a soil map, or an elevation model or something like that? Do things correlate in space? And then obviously we create a permanent record. Anytime we have a picture, just like a wedding album or something like that, right? We have that. We have that always. And especially if it's digital, it doesn't degrade. The only way it loses its value is if we forget we had it. And that's the wonderful thing about how we store imagery right now. That image right there is probably my favorite field image I've ever taken. I got called to severely impacted southern Rootknot nematode soybean field impacted by southern Rootknot nematode around Dermot. I actually walked out there and took the picture during the eclipse. And it was wonderful because I was out there in the middle of the field in August and my skin wasn't burning. It was kind of cool, but it was a sunny day. And I thought, man, this is a great picture. And I can't tell a thing about the area impacted. This is just a cool picture. It's a really neat picture, but I don't know the extent of the damage. I had to walk all up and down that field and get back to the farmer and say, yep, all of it southern Rootknot, and this is what you can expect to yield. So the UASs are really important for my research. They're important for extension work that I do. They're important for the spatial analysis I do. I think they're useful in some scouting applications. It doesn't ever take place scouting. At the end of the talk, we'll see if you agree with me. But this is just a short introduction to this is one we use in our lab. We have others. We bought this for the sole purpose of having something that was off the shelf that a farmer or a consultant would use. There's not any real, there's nothing real fancy here. This is less than $5,000 worth of equipment. And that's a little add-on NDVI sensor. That's a Santero product that I got. And that's something we just wanted to be able to generate an NDVI. We can do more with that sensor. It actually turned out to be a pretty good little sensor. But that's just a Phantom 4 Pro. We have 12 batteries. You don't have to have 12 batteries. That's always the greatest expense is batteries. But we fly it all the time. We fly it all the time, and we have pretty good results. I have another drone that kind of looks like that, and it was a lot more expensive. I won't tell you how much, and I'd much rather fly this than that. So if you're in the market for one, I would just say that there's some challenges with some of the fixed wings, not all. They're much better than they were when I made that purchase, but I really like this. This is simple. Just open up the case and go fly. So I had a grad student. She just finished her master's in December. Her name is Michaela Patterson, and she did a little bit of research on some soybean spatial analysis of foliar diseases. She was flying a drone collecting some aerial imagery, but also part of her project was these Waypoint missions. And so she had to understand the difference in flying a whole field and generating an image of that whole field that was stitched together, and also understanding the utility of flying plots and understanding if she could rate disease with her plots. We'll talk about that in just a second. But for both the orthomosaics and for the plot work, we used all of these particular apps to fly. You can use all of those. You can test them. I'm not necessarily going to endorse any one, although I'll say that I seem to see more people flying with drone deploy. I've had good success with all of them. All of them are good depending on what you're trying to do, and there's a learning curve with every one of them. So this is some of the imagery, just to give you an example of the Phantom 4 Pro and what Michaela was collecting. This is one of her trials that we stripped some fungicide across these fields. This is actually in a cooperator field in Eudora. There's a little bit of water standing or something at the bottom of this field. But this was collected with the Phantom 4 Pro. That is some NIR collected with that little Santero. The Santero was much lower resolution than the RGB sensor on the Phantom 4 Pro. But we generated a pretty nice NDVI. I didn't put a legend on here, just wanted to show you. But you know, red, typically with NDVI, we color code red bad, green good, yellow, somewhere in the middle. But pretty good resolution we were able to resolve. And we actually generated that NDVI. I think actually Michaela did that on ArcMap. So she did some map algebra in ArcMap for that. I do it in Python. Other people do it with Santero's field agent app if they have that sensor. And there's other platforms like Pix4D and things like that. The key here is that if you fly a whole field and you collect still images, you have to have a proper amount of overlap to get those images to stitch together, especially with something like drone deploy. And drone deploy was stitching together our Santero images as well as our RGB. It's really simple. So that Phantom 4 Pro, flying with drone deploy, stitching the images with drone deploy, you know, this is really not a complicated process. It really wasn't once you kind of get the hang of it. The cool thing about drone deploy is it's free, unless you're uploading too many images over the limit. So I want to say it's 500 is free now, and I think, or maybe it's 500 is free, and like 1,000 was $99 a year or something like that. So you know, you can fly really high and still use the free stuff. And this is just the drone deploy interface and processed image that I zoomed in on. Just looking at it on the web, it's pretty good. So I think what's important to note here about where we're at with UASs and drones in general is that they're getting really easy to use. Some of them, they're getting easy to use. They're starting to be what I like to call farmer friendly and scout friendly. There's just not, you know, nobody wants to sit out on the turn row and have to mess with something and figure out why it's not working right, why it's not flying. You know, you're on your laptop trying to get, you know, you don't want to do that. Okay, you don't want to do that. So we're getting to the point where a lot of these platforms give us the opportunity to get away from that. So we're getting pretty good at this. And so we'll talk about some specific uses here for aerial imagery. You know, this plant health scouting NDVI. What does an NDVI mean? Well, an NDVI doesn't mean anything unless you walk out in the field and you ground truth that. It doesn't mean anything if all you've seen is an image. It doesn't mean anything if you don't pair it with some other data layer. So your scouting trips would actually be another data layer, right? You visually observed a problem. You've observed it in multiple areas. You relate that back to where you scouted from that image. That's a good use of an NDVI, not by itself. There's some work that's being done at LSU with Pix and cotton. That's been going on for quite a number of years. Dennis Burns in Northeast Louisiana doing that. I do know we have a specialist in Arkansas that does some work with just water coverage in rice, flying drones. Some defoliant work also from Louisiana. I'm not aware of anyone in Arkansas doing that. I know Dennis has done that. Weed pressure, this is an image I took. I did this for one of our weed scientists in Arkansas, Tom Barber. And those are just pigweeds. And you could go on drone deploy or another program, take your image, paint. You could do it in paint, but you could just mark all the pigweeds if you wanted to count them, or you could see where the pigweeds are clustered in a field, something like that. Very simple application. And then this down here, this disease detection question mark. And being a pathologist, this is something I would love to be able to do, but I'm not sure that we're anywhere close to that. This is a good example, just to give you some quick examples. Don't have a lot of time to get into detail on these, but this is some work Tom Allen and I are doing on a newly characterized disease called taproot decline. This happens to be in a field in Mississippi that Tom found, and we went over and flew it. Actually flew this with a manned plane, but this is a similar image that you would get out of a drone, and you can just see there's the taproot decline, all the yellow, and there's the yield map, and There's the histogram, so there's quite a bit of yield loss there. So relating it to another data layer, relating it to yield, that's a really good use of that particular RGB. The NIR I didn't think was very useful in this instance. So had we collected that, it didn't make much difference. The RGB was good. So I didn't need a fancy sensor to understand the extent of the damage of taproot decline and relate it back to what I got off the combine. Okay. This is a fungicide efficacy trial that Michaela was doing in Ashley County, and that's flown at application, and that was flown at R6. We could see this field had a lot of disease. There was a lot of defoliation in the untreated. You can see where we sprayed a fungicide. So this is, it's kind of showy. It doesn't really tell us a ton about efficacy. It just says there was some. So it just reinforces the data we collected and goes along very well with the yield data that we collected. This was a trial we did in Moroni, which is kind of around Star City, Pine Bluff area. There was some Rootknot nematode in the field, and we stripped in some nematicide, a fumigant called Telone that was a Dow product at the time. And this is June 16th on late planted beans on a moderately resistant variety, and you started seeing the green strip showing up when those soybeans were like this tall. And so you can stand on the turn row and not see anything, but this is an NDVI. The IR picks up things that, light that we can't see with our eyes. And so you could actually see some efficacy there. That was early on, so that was an interesting use of that NDVI. And then, of course, we started seeing the strips later, so on August 18th, they really showed up, and there's 3 big ones right there. And so I want to talk a little bit about some waypoint work that Michaela did, as I mentioned earlier. Leo, how much time I got before you want to cut?
Plenty.
I got plenty? Okay. I don't want to cut into your time, Leo. I don't want to squeeze you out. But so what about Waypoint Missions with an SUAS? This was some wheat work we did. Let's see, this was at Roar. And these are wheat plots, and we had a couple 3 or 4 trials in this, and these blocks. And on one side, this was a moderately resistant variety to leaf rust. And over here, we had a susceptible. And from the air, you can see that there's some damage. You can this is washed out a little bit. You can kind of see some green plots, but not a ton. See a lot of brown in there. You can definitely tell where the susceptible is. It looks like trampled carpet. I can't really tell anything else, right? I mean, I have to go out there and I have to rate those plots and understand where I sprayed a fungicide, what impact that had on the amount of leaf rust that was out there. There's also a little bit of stripe rust out there. And so we got close to it, walking the plots, and took some images like any good pathologist would do. And you see, there's a lot of rust in those plots, a lot of rust. But, the drone imagery didn't add anything. It didn't add anything at all. And this is really up close. I said, man, if I could get there with a drone, if I could get to that point with a drone, I'd really have something. Because then, especially right in wheat. Here's the thing with any working in the spring, right? Can anybody get in the field right now? Okay. It's going to be like that until when? March, yeah, maybe later. There's still, and then they'll get wet sporadically. It seems like when I'm ready to go out and collect data, it rains that morning. Every day I'm ready to go collect data, it rains. And so I'm always tromping through mud, I swear. But I said, in the spring, if I could go out and I could rate plots when I really shouldn't be out there traipsing around rating plots, even when I'm rating cotton plots, or I'm rating soybean plots, or I'm rating corn plots, or something like that, if I could fly out there and at least get an idea of what's going on, or even some of the field scale stuff we do, like we do large block stuff, so I might have to walk from we may have a 40-acre trial, a fungicide trial out there, like I showed you, Michaela had, and I may have to walk, hundreds of yards to my last rating point, way out there. Wouldn't it be nice if, I didn't have to slosh through the mud? Well, I started thinking about, wouldn't it be nice if a scout or a consultant that was in a bind, in a hurry, maybe it's really too wet to get out there or something like that, can't get around to a field because had a lot of rain, you can't get through the low water crossing. I mean, there's all these different scenarios that make it difficult and slow and tedious, and we've got all this ground to cover. I thought, man, if we could just get out there and see, give us an indication, we'd have a much better idea of what's going on out in the field. So part of Michaela's project was to design this Waypoint mission and test this. And so that's what we did. And we used a program called Litchi. We paid $22 on the App Store and to get it on the iPhone and the iPad. And it's not nearly as user-friendly as Drone Deploy. It's not nearly as easy as flying a whole field because you have to use it in conjunction with Google Earth and go and dot all these points and then take this map from Google Earth and put it back into Litchi. But essentially, we're going to do a white paper extension. It'll be on the extension website. We're going to do a white paper and probably a YouTube video to show everyone, to walk them through the steps on how to do a waypoint mission. But essentially what you do is you put down georeference points, put them back into Litchi, and the drone will fly to that point, and you can set it to stop and hover for 3 to 5, 10 seconds, and then it'll snap an image and move to the next point and do the same thing. So we're talking about still images rather than an orthomosaic that we've stitched together. So if you can just negotiate the little bit of computer work you have to do, you could set one up and you could scout the same points in a pinch. Or you can go rate plots like Michaela did. And so this is kind of the way we did it. We painted marks and we digitized on top of those marks. And then this is just, these are the points that Michaela used using Litchi on the plots that she rated. And we used that little Phantom 4 Pro. Now this Phantom 4 Pro is not RTK. They have an RTK version of the Phantom 4 Pro. I thought for sure I was going to have to scrounge around and find some money for RTK for this to work. I really did. I was pleasantly surprised. You know, the GPS signal was good everywhere we're using this. This happens to be at Mariana, so just down the road from here. But we had some difficulty in the summer with just some, there was some difficulty with a particular drone that we had that we wanted to use. And so Michaela didn't really get out and do this work on soybeans, which is what she was working on. So Jason Kelly, our corn and grain, sorghum, wheat agronomist, he had some canola plots, had some wheat plots, and we went out there and we flew those. I say we, they did, went out there and flew those. And Michaela flew at like 2 and 4 and I think 6 meters above the plots. Well, you know, since then, I've used Litchi to fly 1.5 feet or 2 feet above the wheat canopy. And I haven't crashed the drone yet. So, you know, it's amazing to me that this little Phantom 4 off the shelf can follow, you know, fields that are not precision leveled and along the top of that wheat canopy. It's amazing. These were flat fields. There's the drone flying. There's some images that we took, Michaela took of the plots. They were pretty good. We're pathologists. We didn't get any disease. We're mad about that, but she was able to do some stand counts and do, you know, just some canopy density type things. So that was in 2018. And then the spring of 2019. So this last summer in 2019, Michaela was finishing up and they went out and actually were able to execute the Waypoint missions on some soybean fields that she had where fungicides were stripped in. And that right there is about 15 feet AGL, so 15 feet above ground level. She was being really cautious. She didn't want to crash the drone. She didn't want to go out there and have to retrieve it and dig it out of the mud or something. And that's one of our data collection points. That's just the image, like the still image, I popped it up, or you could pop this up on whatever photo viewer you have on your laptop. That didn't tell you anything, right? I can't see a thing. So that's not good. But then if you zoom in, and that's just a couple of scrolls with the wheel, look at all that target spot. And that spot was way out there. Way out there. So it was actually on the georeferenced map that we had of the points we were rating. That was at the very, very end almost of a point row. And there was 100 points out in this field, of a big long field. So that little drone flew, you know, it was probably, I don't know, 150 yards away from the turn row, and it went out there and it was still hovering and still maintained. I mean, you know, without RTK, you know, we're dealing with X, Y, Z. Without RTK, Z is always a problem, right? It's always a little too low or a little too high. If you look on YouTube at some tests people have done with the Phantom 4 Pro, you know, in wind and whatnot, I mean, just hovering, the RTK unit moves just maybe a foot or so. You know, the unit that we had, it'll move maybe, you know, 3 or 4 feet. So there's a lot of play there, but zooming in, you can actually see some target spot. So this doesn't replace scouting, I want to be very, very clear, but in a pinch, you could fly out there and see what's going on in Bingfield. Kind of. Hang on a second. Okay, this is corn. Absolutely not. I hated this. Hated it. So we can do some canopy density work here. That's mainly why we were doing this in corn. But if you zoom in, still can't see anything. The sun was a problem that day, you know. There's all kinds of shadows. Corn's just brutal anyway on a pathologist. I mean, it's hot. That's the southern rust. There was a lot of southern rust in this field. You can't see it. If you're not really good at finding southern rust, it's hard to find in this particular image. There it is. I can't rate that. I wouldn't trust a rating from that. So point being, the Waypoint mission probably is okay in wheat, probably be okay in grain sorghum. It's okay for beans, might be okay for rice a little bit if you're looking at, you know, all these, you're talking about looking for disease in the top of the canopy. I don't like it for corn. There's not a lot that goes on at the top of the corn canopy. Most of what happens in corn that's significant for a pathologist is at the ear leaf. So that's not good. So, you know, these are 2 diseases in soybean, aerial blight, and then again in target spot that move from the ground up. So the location in the canopy is always a problem. Again, what you're looking for or what you're looking at may or may not be the totality of the disease. It's certainly not the totality of the pest pressure. Not even talking about insect pressure. I've mentioned weeds. I've mentioned some diseases in the top third of the canopy. But the UAS is flying above. There's always a sunlight issue, shadows. There's the plant canopy, dark to darker, and then the soil, and that, you know, that creates some problems, some reflectance issues there. So we're going to ask questions after yours. Okay. So I'll wait on the questions. I do want to point out there was research in here funded by the Corn and Grain Sorghum Promotion Board in Arkansas and the Soybean Promotion Board, and we also have a fact sheet that we put out a couple of seasons ago that's been updated if you want to read about certification and non-hobby use of the UAS. So I'll pass it off to Leo now.